very nice restaurant in Budapest and thinking about what can we do in Ukraine to our beloved public policy institutes. Fact has been working for almost 5 years in Ukraine under a USAID project called UNITER. And UNITER stands for Ukraine National Initiatives to Enhance Reforms. But the acronym is what really matters. And that is, we would like to unite people, unite topics, and unite ideas. So Goran and I were uniting over coffee and started thinking about how to roll out our little ideas and how to make them bigger ideas. What you're attending today is sort of the icing on the cake of that idea. I really hope that you will have a fruitful and productive discussion that's starting right now. And because we are a little late, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to some of our initial speakers at the conference. And in order of appearance, it is Yevgen Bistritsky from the International Renaissance Foundation, which over the course of the years united with the think tank fund and pact to make this event happen. Not Kate. Jeff Myers represents USAID. He's the acting director of the Office of Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance. And I have to apologize in Jeff's name and Kate's name. Kate got stuck. She was one of those who didn't manage to get through the snow. And of course, Goran Buldovsky from the think tank fund from Budapest. Yevgen, if you can tell us why we're here, what we're going to do here.
Okay, thank you. Does it speak? Oh. Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to, to send welcomes to our guests, foreign guests and our guests from Russia, нашим гостям из России. But I will continue my, this presentation or my, this welcoming speech in Ukrainian, because this conference is being organized, has been organized for Ukrainians, and of course for this how Ukrainians could cooperate and be partners with the international experts, the specialists in policy analysis and these analytical centers and other think tanks. Thank you very much for Roland for this opportunity. Я спочатку хотів би дуже подякувати самого Роланда Ковача і Пакт Юнайтер, разом з ним USAID, разом з ним наш think tank фонд і Горана Бодьовського і Влада Галушко за можливість за цю конференцію. Це була фактично наша спільна ініціатива, але їх провідна роль, я не можу її применшити, це значення. Вона надзвичайно важлива, я думаю, і подивимося на результати цієї конференції. Я хотів би зазначити деякі проблеми, які, на мій погляд, дуже важливі в контексті того, що ми тут зібралися. А тут є представники, я бачу, і Романа Копця, який один з відомих спеціалістів з аналізу політик, і Олександра Кільєвича із Academy of Public Administration, Державного управління Академія. І всіх вас, я не хочу всіх перераховувати, які зайняті цією справою і які хотіли би, щоб вона розвивалася в Україні. Тому кілька слів про якісь, на мій погляд, проблемні місця. Ну, по-перше, конференція спрямована на те, щоб ідентифікувати потребу суспільства, а суспільство складається з різних рівней, у розвитку того, що ми називаємо аналізом політик, таким виробленням, аналітичним виробленням, експертним виробленням і застосуванням політик. Я називаю policy не політикою, а в множині політики. І вона, мені здається, краще буде перекладатися і не змішуватися з політикою українською мовою. Так от, що саме головне? Мої спостереження говорять про те, що фактично реальної потреби з боку державних інституцій і з боку, скажімо, наших політиків, і з боку парламента, і з боку виконавчої влади, я не буду зараз зачіпати інші гілки влади, відсутня така потреба реально розвинута. За невеликим виключенням. Я потім скажу про тих нових політиків, які війшли в парламент, які самі є представниками руху, аналітичного руху, саме є керівниками і представниками різних аналітичних центрів. От ще фактично такої потреби ми не бачимо. Кілька прикладів. Ну, скажімо, у нас була невеличка або така не дуже довга дружба з каналом «Інтер». Ми намагалися на каналі створити громадську раду, як ви знаєте. Да? Вона була створена, і от ця громадська рада запропонувала, а чому б не зробити передачу, ток-шоу, які у нас є, да? Політичне ток-шоу, так, щоб не між собою розмовляли політики, а щоб залучалися експерти. Да? Експерти, які могли б говорити з ними. От ви бачили, що проіснувала ця передача, 2-3 передачі всього було, а всі інші, скажімо, передачі, як я зараз не кажу про ТВІ, вони фактично, це розмова політики з політиками, це шоу. Без реального незалежного аналізу ситуації. Це такий стан фіксує якраз рівень популізму, рівень загальних міркувань, абсолютно абстрактних, інколи абсолютно відірваних від реальних проблем розвитку і реформ суспільства, які у нас є. Друге, скажімо, спостереження. Ви можете відкрити програми політичних партій, які йшли на вибори в парламент. Вони не представляють собою більш-менш розвинуті платформи, по яким громадяни могли б судити по тому, що пропонується, що думають зробити більш-менш раціонально політичні сили. Тобто там відсутнє бачення того, що притаманно будь-якому policy paper, policy документу, тобто мінімальний аналіз реальних можливостей і руху до тих результатів, які планується зробити. Таких прикладів можна привести багато. Я, наприклад, приймаю участь в координаційній раді при президенті з розвитку громадянського суспільства. Там залучені експерти, таких як Максим Вацимов, ЦПД, інші експерти. І що? Тобто загальне бачення якесь вироблено більш-менш з демократичними гаслами там, або позиціями. План розроблений. Це план не є план, який могли би зробити незалежні експерти. Це нормальний радянський тип план, який взагалі говорить про те, що треба робити, і не говорить, як це досягнути. Він не доведений до якості якогось policy документа, policy paper. Я можу згадати різні громадські ради, які теж мусили б спиратися на якісь розробки, на якісь політики, на якісь бачення, більш-менш конкретно. Це не відбувається в широкому масштабі. Можливо, окремішно аналітики і експерти працюють. Тим не менше, в суспільстві вже є розуміння, що треба запрошувати, скажімо, на телепрограму або на радіо експертів. От уже поняття експертів стало популярним в суспільстві. Уже громадська думка якби схопила його, і вже важлива думка експерта, незалежного експерта. Я не буду говорити про якість такої експертизи, інколи вона дуже непогана, але от чого не вистачає в розумінні громадської думки, це взагалі необхідності включення в діалог суспільства, громадянського суспільства і влади, як медіаторів, як тих, хто допомагає цьому ділу, спрямовує його, і допомагає це аналітичних центрів, think tanks, невеликий центр різних професійно працюючих експертів. Вони залучаються. Ну, на яких засадах? По-перше, позитивний приклад. От я перерахую, Віктор Чумак є в залі депутат нового фактично скликання і сам є керівником аналітичного центру, відомого аналітичного центру. Лілія Гриневич вже залучає експертів. Немиря, який в свій час створив громадську експертну раду, зараз знову намагається опертися на експертів, які в тому числі сидять тут в залі, і допомогти вибудовувати різні політики своєї і своїх колег в діяльності в парламенті. Ну, як правило, це лише ознаки, це окремі випадки. Будь-яке міністерство, яке у нас працює, воно не має всередині себе, в тому числі, скажімо, до речі, так само немає парламент, грошей на експертів, нормальна оплата експертів. Сплош і рядом ви можете знайти ситуацію, коли звертаються очільники держави до аналітичних центрів і за фрі, за просто так зробіть їм аналіз. Скажімо, очевидно, що наше міністерство представляє собі адміністративні органи з мінімальною звернення уваги на вироблення того, що називається політиками, які враховують інтереси різних груп, різних стейкхолдерів, які в даному випадку причетні до сфери, в якій діє міністерство. Я би міг довго тут говорити про це. Ну, зараз йдеться тепер про нас. Я хотів би додати, що самі НГО або громадські організації інколи не розуміють значення політики, або вироблення політик. Інколи моніторинги, або навіть акції прямої дії не спираються на мінімальний аналіз ситуації. Все це нам ще треба зробити, це в майбутньому. І ця конференція допоможе цьому. Я дуже вітаю те, що було зроблено групою, яка оцінювала стан, потребу і стан розвитку незалежної аналітики в Україні. Я дуже ціную, що приїхали наші закордонні друзі, які поділяться своїм досвідом, в тому числі тим, які проблеми є, і які місфанкшенінг, да, такого, якби і негативні приклади із своєї сфери, це дуже важливо критично подивитися. Я думаю, все це додасть, очевидно, нам якби досвіду, і фонд відродження, очевидно, і завтра про це буде говорити заступник директора фонду відродження, і на підвищення, як ми будемо разом з нашими колегами сприяти розвитку аналітичної роботи, аналітичної діяльності незалежних аналітиків в Україні на наступні роки. Дякую за увагу.
Thank you, Jürgen. I would like to join Jürgen thanking our foreign guests who managed to land on time, and thank Boris, Paul, and Giuliani Airport for making it happen. Our next keynote speaker is Jeff Myers from USAID. Jeff, if you could tell us a little bit about how the policy field these days is in America and what's the name of the game.
Yeah, thank you very much. As Roland said, I'm obviously not Kate Sombansiri, who is the director of our office. I was literally called in off the streets, well, from a cafe nearby to say a few words in the opening today. But Kate's misfortune was my good luck. It looks like a very interesting program, and so I'm glad to be here, and I'll try to stay as long as I can and take advantage of the opportunity. It also gives, I think, Roland an opportunity to outdress me for one time. So I apologize for my appearance, but that's not a big issue. As a good diplomat, I'm going to read what I was given and probably not say anything very interesting. And thanks to Roland also for getting over Kate's notes to me this morning. So forgive me if I'm reading too much, but again, I'm pleased to be here, and especially as you all reflect on the field of policy research in Ukraine and the ways in which you can strengthen your work and the management of your organizations. In a globalized world with rapidly advancing communication tools, it is crucial for decision makers, civil society, and citizens to have access to high quality, up-to-date, and nonpartisan policy analysis. This kind of analysis is especially relevant for Ukraine as it uses this information to progress on its path toward democratic reform. Ukrainian think tank roles are varied. You are responsible for not only creating high quality, relevant, and balanced information, but you are also responsible for representing this information in ways that adequately reflect the results of your research and the interests of those you represent. In addition, you are well positioned to be agents of change in decision-making processes by informing legislators, civil society, organizations, businesses, and citizens of your analysis through accessible content and critical debate. Often critical debate around an issue can be played out more completely through think tanks than in the political and private realm. In the US, there are various types of think tanks that represent many different groups. These think tanks represent their constituencies, and discourse among them provides space for difficult policy and social issues to be critically evaluated. This also helps shape the public opinion of citizens as well as lawmakers. US think tanks use a variety of tools to conduct their research, spread their information, and connect them with other groups that are working on similar issues. Take, for example, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which was established in 1910 and now employs many experts on worldwide issues and has global and numerous centers. They use a full toolbox of analysis, events, infographics, programs, and even fellowships to achieve their mission. As you participate in the conference today and think about the demand side of policy research, I urge you to think critically about your audiences. I urge you to consider ways in which you can foster new relationships with activists, trade unions, citizens, and politicians in order to increase public disclosure and representation in decision-making. Communication will be a central theme today. You will discuss ways in which you can deepen your communication with each other and with the groups that rely on your research and analysis. You will have the opportunity to think of ways to better communicate your work to new and different segments of society. You will be able to expand on your own toolboxes and think of actions that will help expand your effectiveness and reach. I hope that today's event will provide an excellent platform for a fruitful exchange of knowledge, experience, and ideas for advancing policy research in Ukraine. USAID and the American people are committed to Ukraine's democratic development, including strengthening the country's think tanks as the main providers of policy-relevant research. Thank you to the Uniter Project, the International Renaissance Foundation, OSI Think Tank Fund, for organizing this event. The event will enhance the work of decision makers, media, civil society, and other users of their products. And I think USAID is extremely grateful when we can cooperate together with other donors and other thinkers, organizations like you in endeavors like this. So, of course, for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at the agenda yet, but Jeff noted the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and we are lucky enough to have one of your colleagues here from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And hopefully she will be sharing her ideas, experiences, particularly coming from Ukraine. Goran, how are things in Central and Eastern Europe? Don't tell us anything bleak about Hungary, please.
No, but I can tell you bad things about Central and Eastern Europe. You know, in misery there is a very little comfort when you see your neighbors doing as badly as you do. And I'm afraid that in Central and Eastern Europe, where most of our work in the think tank fund happens at the moment, it's not exactly happy times. And they're not happy times for general population. And they're, you know, I think we have to be frank, they're not happy times for people like you who actually appreciate and value and do meaningful knowledge production and analysis. It's simply less and less respected. And as somebody who manages a fund that really tries to support the generation and communication of policy relevant knowledge, I think it's important to accept that these are not the best times that I've ever seen. In that context, I think it's very important to state, you know, and I will hold the report while saying this, it's a critical report. And let's start from that. It's a critical report, but one thing that I want to make sure is that, you know, it doesn't say, and it doesn't mean that think tanks in Ukraine are bad. As somebody who works from a regional perspective, and the think tank fund covers 20 more countries in 20, actually more than 20 countries in entire Central and Eastern Europe space and post-Soviet space, and as well we have started working a lot in Western Europe in the last 2 years. I have to say Ukrainian think tanks fare pretty well for the regional standards. But at the moment, it's not about rankings. Actually, it's not about tables and where do you fit, because if the environment is very difficult, and if we're talking about times where you have to grapple with how to make a meaningful contribution, it's more about your value to fellow citizens, it's more about value in your own societies, rather than topping the rankings. So my first hope from this meeting and this entire endeavor that we've undertaken with our partners is that actually to allow ourselves an honest and frank and direct discussion. And I really do hope that this conference will be about that. You know, we could engage on our side as donors, you can engage on your side as think tanks and researchers in many justifications and explanations why the situation is as it is. But frankly, I hope that this conference will be to go beyond that. It's not about justifying. We know that it's difficult. We know that a lot of things are not as they're written in the textbooks. I really believe that this will be a good opportunity where we'll sit in big forum and maybe smaller groups where we could honestly think, okay, what could be done, and engage in a genuine and frank dialogue. Second, I have to say, Ukraine is an important, big country, not only for Central and Eastern Europe, and that's why you get all the attention. And of course, everybody thinks that it has a unique set of problems, and you do. But the problems that Ukraine has are also shared with a lot of different countries. And I have to say, there was no bigger surprise engaging in Western Europe to see also the level, how in a lot of developed democracies, where actually elections and the proper parliamentary democracy functions, how actually character of politicians started to matter much, much more than the substance of their policy options. And I think it's very important to underline that when you think about that in your own context, sometimes you think, oh, it's only us, it's only here. Unfortunately, I would say it's not only you. And actually, I would say a lot of things that I hope to hear on this particular conference is also about what you can do in this context, but also knowing that other things, other people grapple with the same problems. That's why actually we brought our European colleagues to tell you not about their successes, but about their failures and about what they grapple. Because our experience in the think tank fund at the moment is actually there's a lot of similar challenges in front of the whole policy field, in front of the whole policy research field, because these are difficult times. We actually used a lot of loaded terminology. In our fund, we used for quite a while transition, and then we look at Western Balkans and we ask ourselves, where on earth are these countries transitioning to? Not to mention the post-Soviet space. So then we said, okay, it's politically correct to use developing. We started using developing, but we really want one thing what is important, we have to go beyond the mantra, and we have to go beyond just the statistics and the average. And I have to ask, first of all, if not my grandmother, then my mother, to understand what I'm really working and what actually that contributes to the life of her life and maybe the life of the community surrounding her. So in this complex environment, I think we all share as donors a sort of a common identifier why to organize this, because we think that at the moment organizations of your type are at a critical juncture in this country in this very moment. And they're at a critical juncture for a number of reasons. First of all, we've heard a lot of times elites do not listen. Political elites do not listen. And as I said before, it's unfortunately in most of countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and not only there, is the similar case. And very often we focus on what to do. And exactly, I use the word focus. So focusing on the substance. But I believe organizations of this type have neglected for a long time the issue of locus, meaning where to do this work and against whom, and actually look for agile and interested listeners who are not necessarily maybe the politicians, and who are maybe more based in the communities, they're more based in the NGOs, more based elsewhere than just the politicians. And I think it's very important to understand this first, and then probably think of ways how it could be achieved. This is not to be achieved overnight. The other thing, what I really would like to emphasize, and probably coming with the banner of open society helps me a bit, and that is the difference between expertise and think tanks. Both of them are legitimate in the policy process, but they're not the same. And I think it's very important to understand, especially in a country like Ukraine, where expertise is acknowledged and, frankly speaking, also hired by those in power. We also, in a lot of democratic countries, you have actually even organizations that are legitimately who call themselves think tanks, and they're experts, but they're also hired guns. And this is not detrimental to the policy process. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's helpful. But I think it's important to distinguish between those who have expertise and those who have expertise and set of value and vision for their country. And I tend to believe that think tanks are the latter, so that they put in tandem the expertise on thematic issues, but also the values about the development and the vision of their society. And I believe that that's also one of the critical junctures, especially in times where the vision of this society is not very clear, the think tanks should emphasize. So to sum up, we as a regional fund have a great interest to see all the countries developing. Also in Ukraine, I think simply by not only the size of it, but simply by the complexity and the need to improve. We talk here in Kiev today, but also when we talk about the development, we talk a lot about the development in the separate regions, which in their own right could be small states elsewhere. You know, when you talk about the regional capitals like Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, or Lvov, or Kharkiv. So it's a lot of these places. So I think we should start thinking as well in that direction. And as I said, I hope we just contribute to this debate, which of course will be ongoing.
Thanks, Goran. Thanks explaining a little bit on what was in the background of our discussion, what was in the background of our mind when we kicked off our discussions and managed to unite all of you by now today. I will be short, but I would like to use the opportunity now to actually kick off the conversation that's going to follow through with the panels that are coming after us. Goran made a very important point about we need to figure out some ways of how we are possibly reaching beyond the policymaker, the elite circles. And I was doing a little bit of research the other day, because this is something that always interests me personally, professionally, because of our project. And I would like to offer you a couple of ways of this how. And bandwagoning on Goran's point is that who are those people? I will be focusing on people really that are not necessarily seen as the ones who are making policy, but they definitely are the ones we believe who are demanding Pareto-efficient policies. A couple of things that are happening these days in the think tank field that captures the curious mind's attention like mine is how much science has expanded from the classical distribution of science. And more we see interdisciplinary approaches coming from policy institutes. In the last 20 years, brain science has expanded significantly. Genetic science has expanded significantly. Yet, most of our think tanks in either side of the former Iron Curtain tend to be using still and relying still on more of the traditional sciences. I was having a dinner conversation last night, and we were talking about some new sciences that can potentially, by building into our think tank researches, give us some new examples on what's in people's mind. How many of you have heard of the term epigenetics? Probably very few of us. I have not heard of it up until 2 months ago. But interestingly, this science exists over almost 20 years. However, it has a bit of a bad connotation. How many of you know of the science called eugenics? Yes, there's a little more people, yeah? But we don't use that term ever. We don't even refer to that science. We don't consider that science. Now, what epigenetics are doing, they're basically studying brain, and they're studying brain cells. And this science still is in very, very embryonic form itself, because for many, many years it was just not politically correct to even think of genetics, how it influences our political decisions. But recent surveys and recent data from epigenetics shows that there are indeed some genetic foundations of our political choices. The data is too small, the research is too embryonic to draw major conclusions, but I think it's for us and for you think tankers to start thinking outside of the traditional sciences and look for some more interdisciplinary approaches here. My other prescription for how to try to make an impact on a larger population, and that is what I call the shock and awe approach. Many of you who have met with me over the course of the years know that I like to shock and I like to awe. Sometimes I have what others would call the big, bold, hairy ideas. And I do this on purpose. It's not because I do not respect what all of you are doing. It's because I would like to trigger some additional thinking. And to give you an example of how some of those that are studying think tanks are considering this is what initially was called the taxi driver test. But for the Ukrainian context, I would rather call the babushka test. So that Goran can explain in Macedonia too, how to try to generate policy ideas and policy prescription. The babushka test has basically three major questions: whether the research is relevant, whether the research is useful, and whether the research was quote-unquote sticky. In other words, does it make an impact further than just to the next person? This I take from a blog. There's a number of blogs. Goran has one on think tanks, and there's another one that's called On Think Tanks. I highly recommend all of you to take a look at it from time to time. So the babushka text comes from the taxi driver test that is described in this blog. And the basic approach is very simple. Take a very short taxi drive. Take a very short marshrutka drive, or spend a few minutes on the Reno with the babushki. And ask them what their priority lists are for policy changes. And you would not be surprised that their list of priorities is quite often are the same priorities like yours. You know, and corruption, very high food prices, inability to travel without visa, and so on. So your first test is usually the one that works. You know, it's relevant. You're working on these topics. But then comes the next thing: is how useful is what you're saying. What On Think Tanks is recommending is just to simply look at what their recommendation would be. And if they just say, we need to improve, or we need to decrease, you know, the simple ideas, then you probably have to go back to the drawing board because you are not saying anything more than what babushki already know. Think tank's job is to actually try to offer them something more concrete, something more actionable, so that they would be able to understand. Finally, what stickiness is. Stickiness is testing again your ideas. Once you describe your description is done, goes beyond what babushki already know, then you have to do it again on babushki. Have to go back to the Reno and talk to them for 10-15 minutes and see how it plays out. If you can tell this thing in 15 minutes what your ideas are, then you're one step further. But there's actually 3 questions On Think Tanks is recommending you ask yourself after explaining. You would have to ask babushka to go to the next babushka and see if she was able to explain in no more than 10-15 minutes what you just conveyed. If the answer is yes, go next to the next question. You should ask the other babushka, would she be willing to and able to describe your ideas in 10-15 minutes? If the answer is yes, go to the next question. You would ask all the babushkas around you whether they would be willing to explain what they just heard. And if you have any no's to any of these three questions, you failed the test, you have to go back to the drawing board.